Good morning, friends. My name is Mackenzie. This is my channel, Thank You Much. Thanks for joining me. This is going to be the first in what I would like to make a series called 5 Weekly Fixations, in which I detail 5 things that I'm obsessing about and or just like thinking too much about in general. Right now they're going to be somewhat random, but I think over time I might make them themed. We shall see. But yeah, I think this video should be short and sweet. So without further ado, here are this week's 5 weekly fixations. All right, so first up, we have a book called The Trees by Percival Everett. I read this book a few weeks back. It was recommended from Lizzie Hadfield, who has a channel here on YouTube. It was a Pulitzer Prize contender, if that tickles your fancy. Yeah, but I picked it up because Lizzie Hadfield had said that it was a page turner, but it was also smart. And we were about to go on a trip and I wanted something that I could just like really easily read, maybe fly through. It would be like easy to kind of pick back up. And it totally was. And that's hard for me to find. So kind of high praise coming from me. And it's not even like I'm like a huge critic. I just don't read as much as I would like. But anyway, yeah, so basically it's like part murder mystery, part meditation on historical and contemporary racism in America. It's really smart, but also really compelling. Like, it's just so easy to read, you fly through it. It's written as like a satire, and there's just like a lot of really rich kind of literary devices and language used throughout. And it just kind of like leaves you thinking. And I don't know, I just thought it was really smart. I thought it was really enjoyable. If you're interested in something that's like a super entertaining read, pick it up. If you're interested in something that like really makes you kind of look at the world in a different way and like think harder about social issues, pick it up. Yeah, couldn't recommend it more. I fucking love this book. Okay, second weekly fixation is this movie called Dinner with Friends. Max and I stumbled upon it on HBO the other night when we were looking for a movie to watch, and we were both kind of gobsmacked by how much we enjoyed it. It's actually an HBO original movie, which I don't think they do anymore. Correct me if I'm wrong, I guess. And it's basically just kind of about like a group of 4 friends, like it's 2 couples, and it just kind of explores like the interpersonal dynamics between the couples and then the couples together. And just kind of how that changes as life changes, and kind of all of the interpersonal like fluctuations that occur as you go through life and creating families, yada yada yada. Just like really thought-provoking and interesting, and such like a wonderfully pleasant way that we did not expect from our like Saturday night movie pick. And apparently it's based on a play, which I guess is like another note. Like, I live in New York. I've lived in New York for several years now. My rec, if you are kind of like me and you like really thinky kind of like cultural criticism pieces, skip the musicals on Broadway and opt for either like indie or like Broadway, kind of like more simple music free plays. Like, literally look for descriptions that are extremely simple, like X person does Y, like as simple, or just like something that implies there's some sort of relationship like at play. They're usually really interesting, they're usually really thought-provoking, and they're just like pleasant little cultural experiences to have. It's New York, so they're incredibly well acted, incredibly well directed, yada yada yada, all that fun stuff. Okay, and then the third weekly fixation is this lecterm notebook, and when I say lecterm, please take that with a grain of salt, because this is how it's spelled. Can you see that? Yes, this is how it's spelled, and I'm probably butchering it, but I've bought like several of these over the last year, I think. This is like a new one I just got. They're so nice. They're so sleek and so pretty, and they're just comfortable to write in, and kind of like all of that thrown together is like incentive enough for me to really just stick to one notebook, which I like. I really hate having like all my notes in different places. It's nice to just have one notebook to go to I don't know, find my grocery list, find my work notes, etc., etc. Probably not very sexy for my future relatives if they're like combing through my notebooks to learn more about me. It's gonna be like diary entry followed by, I don't know, how to code, even though this is aspirational, I don't know how to code. But would recommend. I really like them. They're really pleasant to write in. Okay, and then the other thing, because you can have a notebook without a pen, is these Sarasa pens. Oh, I'm like, can you see that? It's a little shiny. I'll link all of these purchasable things in the description. But these pens are so nice. They're like a grown-up gel pen. They're so pleasant to write with. I love them. They're so pretty. They look so pretty on the page. I'm gonna show you if they're. This is them. Look how nice. Ah. Okay. Anyway, they're incredible. If you're someone who writes and you hate your pens, buy these pens. They're so nice. They're a little expensive, but they're really nice. Okay, this week's fourth fixation is Haley Nauman's newsletter, Maybe Baby. I think if you identify at all as an overthinker, or just in general, like kind of cultural analysis, like this is a really good newsletter to follow. I don't read nearly as many articles, books, or newsletters as my overcritical brain tells me I should, but I literally never miss Haley Nauman's newsletter. I just think it's really interesting. It's thought-provoking. She writes really well. She talks about interesting topics. I think she's a good one to follow. Her pieces are a lot of, like I said, cultural criticism, and then there's social analysis, and then the occasional lifestyle rec. Yeah, so check it out. Okay, and then this week's fifth fixation is something I'm thinking way too much about. I think in this series, the fifth is always going to be something I'm thinking too much about, because I like brand cohesion. I don't know. Anyway, so the fifth thing is something I'm thinking too much about, and that's the Barbie movie and the fact that I didn't like it. And I'm sad. It's not that surprising. I'm a pretty critical person, honestly. And also, this is not me trying to yuck your yum. Like, if you liked it, that's great. Like, it just offered you something that, like, it didn't offer me. And that's fine. I understand that's how life works. As is my habit, I was just thinking a lot about why I didn't like it and, like, what about the narrative kind of pulled me out of the story and, like, pulled me out of kind of being able to enjoy it more. And something I kind of landed on was kind of Ken's storyline subplot, which not really sub, it was big part of the plot was Ken's storyline. I'm just gonna read like a quick thing I wrote down the other day when I was kind of in the midst of overthinking all of this, just because I want it to be as clear and coherent as possible. So pardon the fact that I'm reading from my notebook, my Electrum notebook. Okay, so Ken more or less gets red-pilled in this movie when he enters the patriarchal world. This is immediately confusing to me, because being red-pilled / like becoming an incel or like a misogynist in general is a product of patriarchy, not of rejection, which I feel like the implication of him immediately becoming red-pilled is that like he was either red-pilled by rejection or he was red-pilled by like kind of the power drunkenness of existing in patriarchy for 2 seconds. So the reason that being red-pilled is a product of patriarchy is because incels can only become incels because they feel entitled to women's affections and bodies, and they feel entitled to this because they were raised in a world that constantly messages and like polices women's subjugation to man. So inceldom is kind of a response to the inferiority men feel when they can't properly wield power over women despite living in a world that led them to believe they were entitled to that power, but not only that if they can't wield that power, like they are somehow less than. So all of that is to say that like patriarchy is really integral to like inceldom, and I would argue misogyny as well, as it kind of turns a woman's rejection or lack of attention into a perceived subversion of the patriarchal power dynamics, right? Like he's seeking her attention, but he thinks that she should be seeking his attention, i.e. she has power over him rather than the other way around. Makes him feel like shit, right? So it's like Ken comes into the world, he's like wearing bright pink, like feminine colors, and like supposedly he feels like emboldened with like all of the power he feels like de facto. And like maybe that's Ryan Gosling's experience, but I can't imagine that's that many men's experience. It's like you do anything like remotely feminine and you're kind of shamed for it, right? Like that's how patriarchy works. Like feminine is coded for bad. Or like not being masculine is coded bad, right? Like gender dynamics. Okay, so say we've like established that like patriarchy leads to inceldom. So this led me to either of like two conclusions from like Ken's storyline resolution. And like just as a reminder, like his storyline resolution is like Barbie apologizes to him for taking him for granted and encourages him to like find himself, and that liberates him. Whatever. Also, spoiler alert, I think this is important, but like basically, so Ken goes to the patriarchal real world. He like catches on to patriarchy. It makes him feel really good. Critically, it makes him feel really good. But he can't quite swing it in that world because he doesn't have any of the like technicality like requirements to like have a job. He doesn't have a degree, so he can't get a job. So he decides to bring patriarchy back to Barbie Land, which like is kind of this, I don't know, supposed like feminist utopia. Matriarchy place, right? And then he just kind of takes over and makes it patriarchal in like a very doll-like way, I guess. Okay, so the first possible conclusion of his kind of like conclusion, which is like he needs to find himself, and like Barbie apologizing to him liberated him, which so that means that inceldom is a product of rejection, not patriarchy, or worse, inceldom is a product of overzealous feminism, right? Like if he became an incel because either he was rejected by Margot Robbie, or like he became an incel because he hated a world in which feminism kind of won, you know, that's more or less how they brand Barbie Land. It's like feminism won. So if Barbie Land is either a matriarchy or a feminist utopia, like free of patriarchy, how could Ken have so easily fallen into inceldom? Like mere hours after arriving in a patriarchal world. Like worse, why does that world make him feel good? Like Ken within patriarchy would be considered a simp and would be considered like not masculine enough. And incels like don't incel because they feel like euphorically like drunk on power. They incel because they feel powerless in patriarchy. And I don't necessarily think that like Greta Gerwig's aim was for like this to be the takeaway. I'm just saying that like kind of watching and like analyzing his storyline, I guess I just kind of kept coming away with like, but what are you trying to say? And like, even if she was trying to say something different, like to me, the storyline kind of lent itself to like this theme, which means like at worst, it's kind of pushing this like narrative of patriarchy and feminism that's misleading. And then at best, it's just kind of like a muddled, dare I say, kind of lazy storyline. I kind of feel like they picked up the like patriarchal theme and then they just kind of dropped it when it no longer served them. And I just think in general, like kind of the branding of the movie, like how it's being taken up, even if it wasn't necessarily meant to be taken up in this way, is very kind of like educate the masses on patriarchy and like fucking celebrate women's power and like try to, you know, promote progress in society, yada, yada, yada. And like, I don't think a movie alone is responsible for that, right? But like, because they kind of took that upon themselves to like make it the theme of the movie, I don't know, I'm sorry, I just think that like kind of picking up on the patriarchal thing and then just giving up on it halfway through without trying to make it a coherent, like real like storyline theme, ends up kind of being misleading. I was like seeing tweets, like one tweet was like, oh, now I get that like men turn to patriarchy because they feel less than. It's like, no, men feel less than because of patriarchy, and that drives them to try to kind of wield their power or kind of compensate by subjecting others to their power, right? Which is often like women or like weaker men, like yada, yada, yada. Like that's how it works. It's like you feel bad, and so you feel the need to compensate for that bad feeling and that insecurity by like projecting power onto others and like subjugating others who like you have the ability to subjugate. Like that's how patriarchy works. So I just think it's kind of a bummer. It feels like a missed opportunity to like properly educate people on like patriarchy. Okay, so I think the second possible conclusion here is that like Ken's storyline is somewhat of a metaphor for women's experience in patriarchy, and therefore kind of implies that like women must crave the same sort of power drunkenness that Ken stumbled upon. And the reason I say this is I read a few reviews of the movie after the fact, and someone specifically pointed out kind of the subversion of the power dynamic between Barbie and Ken, which is obviously very intentional and like just really in your face in the movie. But in particular, they were talking about kind of in the conclusion, it's Barbie who kind of liberates Ken by telling him to like find himself, and that like he doesn't need like romantic love to like embrace his own power. And the reviewer was basically saying this is a subversion of like kind of the usual plot line for like rom-coms or like other kind of female-centric narratives, right? Okay, so if we're running with that, then we're running with the fact that like Ken's storyline is a bit of a metaphor for like how women would react in the same circumstance if everything was the inverse, right? So it's like women exist in patriarchy, that must mean that they crave like kind of the power drunkenness of like matriarchy, which like again I think patriarchy is hurtful for everyone involved. I think a lot of women, or at least like women who spend a lot of time with men, and just like a side note, I know I'm talking really kind of gender binary way about the genders. I apologize, but I guess for the purposes of like the Barbie analysis, it is very binary genders, which is another criticism. You could probably lot against it. But again, so patriarchy is hurtful for everyone involved. I think a lot of women, or at least women who spend a lot of time with men, really understand that. And the dream of feminism is really not to subvert that power dynamic. It's literally to advocate for equality. And listen, like feminism, diverse, large movement, way of thinking, yada, yada, yada. I'm sure there are people who would disagree with me, but I can't imagine Greta Gerwig is making the argument that feminists are advocating for a world in which women have power over men and like men are subjugated to women. So I don't know, if you kind of like run with that thinking, like the conclusion weirdly echoes like kind of anti-feminist sentiment that like feminism is a movement with the aim of subjugating men. And I thought this kind of applied especially to like the moment at the end of the movie when the Kens like asked for a seat on the Supreme Court. The Barbies were like, no. And then they said that they could sit on some secretary department something. And then the narrator makes some like quippy remark about how like, oh, like maybe over time, like men or the Kens can progress as much as women have in like our society today. So it's just like kind of making the joke that like, you know, we've gotten far, but not that far. And like, it's going to take a while for the Kens to get that far. Anyway, again, I don't necessarily think this is like what Greta Gerwig or any of the showrunners were like trying to do. I think they just kind of took up patriarchy and I think they just kind of dropped it halfway through. But I guess what I'm saying is that I really felt like that took me out of the story and it made it hard for me to enjoy it. Like, and I think part of that has to do with kind of my interest in like feminism and like analyzing patriarchy, all that fun stuff. I also think it has to do with kind of my very perfectionist way of thinking about like stories and like project cohesion, yada, 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 which is basically my way of saying that like, just because this didn't appeal to me doesn't mean it won't appeal to you. It appealed to a lot of people and it touched a lot of people. I just think this is why I didn't necessarily like it, but I'm not necessarily like, I fucking hate it and everyone who likes it is dumb. I don't feel that way at all. If you liked it, I'm happy for you. It was cute. It just wasn't really my speed. Yeah, so that's it for my 5 weekly faves. If you have like any thoughts about the Barbie storyline analysis, anything that you think I'm missing, or even just, I would love to hear about your positive experiences with the Barbie movie and live vicariously through you. And maybe rewatch it with kind of a new lens. But yeah, that was it for today. I hope you guys, this is going to be published on a Sunday, so I hope you're having a lovely Sunday. Yeah, and I'll catch you in the next one. Like and subscribe if you enjoyed. Thanks for watching.